galactic date 20XX. At the far reaches of
my bedroom
lies a
person
on the brink of ruin. The
person's
name?
Dazz.
Due to a booming population, booming appetites, and a basic lack of planning,
Dazz's
inhabitants have all but exhausted their
fun
supply. Just as they're about to give up, the final vessel reports back with news of a miraculous discovery. They mobilize to investigate the
signal.
they name
The signal. Dazz's
last hope rests on 3 intrepid explorers.
So, let's talk about Pikmin. It's a series I clearly have a close relationship with after all these years, and it's one of Nintendo's most unique premise for a game that they've ever produced. While most formats of the Nintendo adventure usually ensues some bite-sized missions with a linear progression path or ticking off check marks of locations to reach, the Pikmin series has taken a completely different approach to how it lays out its adventure. And hey, since Pikmin has been on everybody's lips recently for some random reason, I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring too. I did start my channel on a Pikmin foundation after all, and better yet, since another YouTuber by the name of AntDude has marked this month as Olimarch, why don't I contribute to the hashtag too for a little bit of fun? Unless that's a really uncool thing to do, in which case, sorry AntDude. So let's start right at the beginning, back to 2001. Miyamoto has been working on this new genre for this new IP and it's finally been released, Pikmin 1. And though there is somewhat of a similar progression between worlds with the 5 different areas you can unlock throughout the game, instead of having a clear goal and path to follow, each area, and similarly the whole game, acts as a giant escape room. Progression isn't made by just moving forwards, the destination at the end of the path isn't the point. Olimar's whole journey on the Pikmin planet isn't one of seeing the sights, it's one of manipulating the environment around him. It's about exploration and finding the tools he needs to access new areas, with the end goal being to have the means to access a way off of the planet and back home. And this was all something that wasn't too common for video games at the time, or even now. Sure, exploration certainly wasn't something overtly new, with The Legend of Zelda kind of being the figurehead of that trope, but Olimar and the Pikmin story is one of survival. Not only is there an open-ended path to choose where you want to go next, but there's also an ever-present time limit, restricting the player and forcing them into making serious decisions. Thankfully, the premise and mechanics of the game all work to give the player a little wiggle room to have a real chance of survival. For all 30 days that Olimar's air supply can provide, there are exactly 30 ship pieces scattered across the planet to be collected. And on that first day, it is established to Olimar the basic uses of the Pikmin to allow him to feasibly reach his goals. Pikmin can be plucked, they can multiply, in numbers they can push hurdles and carry the very tools he needs to escape. These few basic mechanics form the entire basis of Olimar's entire adventure, not just across the game, but across the series. It's planting the seeds of how the whole adventure will unfold, through teamwork and organization. Now with the foundation of the premise officially planted, it's time for the next natural step, watering it and allowing it to expand. As the Pikmin franchise has continued, it's held on to its absolute basics of multiplying Pikmin and commandeering them to overcome hurdles, whilst adding more elements to throw into the mix. The very next day in Olimar's adventure, he's introduced to natural enemies and learns of the red Pikmin's innate offensive advantage through the thorny nature of their noses, whilst also discovering the yellow Pikmin, presenting varying throwing arcs and the ability to wield a new type of item, showing players that progression can be found not through destination, but the journey and discovery itself. Finding the yellow Pikmin doesn't just act as a checkbox to tick off for reaching them, they act as a fundamental key to the franchise's locked doors. Having explored and made this discovery, the player can now open up more pathways and open options that were previously impossible, even if they were given more time and the number of reds they had. And though the overall goal is collecting the ship parts, which is literally a list to be ticked off, it's these explorative collections that truly progress the game forwards for the player and Olimar. Having enough pieces to access the distant spring is great and all, but without finding the blue Pikmin first, you're gonna have a hard time with 50% of the new land. Now with the natural form of progression officially stood up, the series is free to expand in any direction it wants to, further enriching and feeding into the gameplay variety even more. Over the next few years, Olimar's unveiling toolkit would expand to reveal fire and water, varying speeds and strengths, nectarous upgrades, underground treasures and poison, and of course new and enlightening species of Pikmin. It's here at Pikmin 2 that the developers also chose to add an extra element of progression in a way to make it more prevalent across the game's extended playtime. Since Pikmin 2 alleviated the time limit as well as introduced the time-freezing cave mechanics, it somewhat became clear the existence of 5 additional Pikmin simply wasn't enough for the double-digit completion time. Additionally, the cave format had turned the gameplay to a more linear and conventional form of progression, and though these separated pathways were more like branches peering away from the main trunk, there still needed to be a more definitively good reward by the end of it, especially considering the more generic collectible rewards were already scattered along these mini pathways as well as all over the surface world. So by taking inspiration from the Pikmin's expansive impact on the gameplay, these caves would often reward the player with gameplay alterations in the form of upgrades for Olimar himself. No longer so heavily reliant on the Pikmin skill set, Olimarch could now reach new heights, or at least new conveniences, with the brewing abilities to pluck Pikmin faster using just his whistle, or becoming immune to gnawing enemies or knockback attacks, having faster run speeds or brightening up darker areas, as well as falling asleep at any time. Clearly expanding the gameplay to places it never could before. Though perhaps one of the more apparent ones was the introduction of a second character to allow for multitasking opportunities. These upgrades were minuscule in affecting gameplay, perhaps to not overshadow the basis of using the Pikmin specifically to access new areas in the game, but still, some were clearly quite helpful to the player, if not through accessibility upgrades, at least in polishing the gameplay format to adhere better to the real-time strategy genre. With these upgrades, many tasks became faster and more succinct, allowing the players to fully utilize their tasks in a better manner whilst not taking away from the Pikmin's abilities themselves. And so, as the series continued, the natural form of expansion continued to bloom, whether it be through new Pikmin and their abilities to open up new accessible areas, or through polishing the gameplay mechanics to create a more succinct experience for the player. And after a 9-year gap, Pikmin 3 introduced players to the new hurdle of crystallization and liftable objects. It brought a new immunity to crushing enemies, as well as new captain abilities of dodging to the side or swarming Pikmin into a stampede. The time-based mechanics reintroduced the time limit, although it was a rather lax one tailored towards granting more time as more fruit was collected. The real-time strategy aspect was also perfected with 3 simultaneous characters, as well as an element of automation in both directing AI characters as well as repetitive Pikmin commands. And though many of these newest introductions replaced some of the old, they all still worked in tandem with each other to create a highly functional, natural progression for the game to unveil as players explored and discovered the lay of the land. These 3 games are perpetually linked to their unique form of progressive adventure. The progression doesn't come from reaching the end of the day, it doesn't come from unraveling what's at the bottom of a cave. The progression comes from exploring the land and collecting all there is to grow as a person and inform yourself so you can reach the next spot through your growing experience. The last level of each game is never the goal, it's always the natural progression you have collated over your time on the planet and with the game that has led you to the final area in the first place. The progression comes not from a checklist, but from experience and the combined efforts of your curious need for adventure. Although, in Pikmin 3, it is at least a little more linear in that you're always following a signal as a single checklist on your map. It's always there on hold to allow you to explore elsewhere, but out of the main games, it's as close to mission-based as it gets. Oops. So let's say that you've done it. You've officially progressed. You've gotten everything, or at least enough to have full access to the world around you. What happens now? What happens after you've reached the pinnacle? In Pikmin 1, you have access to all 3 primary Pikmin types. With them, you can touch all of the land on the planet, be it through flames, across water, or behind giant blockades. In Pikmin 2, you have become proficient in time management. You have minor offensive and defensive abilities, as well as the mechanical tools to assist your growing Pikmin army to maximize their physical potential. And by the end of Pikmin 3, you have a new batch of Pikmin at your disposal. You can command them to efficiently defend themselves or attack all at once, and your ability to organize your team are perhaps as perfected as they can possibly be. The final job to take on in all 3 of these games is one last trial, a culmination of all you have learned, with perhaps one of the hardest aspects of each game, putting every element and gameplay gimmick all in one place to tackle all at once. It's crossing a pathway that is barricaded by an intertwined system of rock, fire, and water. It's reaching down to the bottom of one last cave to defeat a creature wielding all 4 elements. It's organizing an escape with a competent team and fighting one last fight against more of the elements. It's all been led up to with new realizations and expansions of those mechanics, all to pay off here. On first glance, they may seem quite doable, and in some cases it can be surprisingly easier than expected with the right technique, but it is a trial, the next spike up in difficulty. And though you've been preparing for this bout through all those hours of playing, sometimes they can punch a little harder than you were expecting. As Olimarch is experiencing his first time on the planet, he writes his thoughts out in a diary. Initially optimistic and curious, he sometimes talks about his family life or his dreams and aspirations. And though this is clearly just a kid-friendly game, you have to ask, what would be going through his head through these last few days? Would he be staring up at the sky wondering about the point of his existence at all? Would he be questioning destiny or what the future could lie ahead of him? Would he ever have a moment of stopping in his tracks and wondering if any of this is worth it? Telling Olimarch's story and character through monologuing diary entries is something very rare for a protagonist and opens up a much more intimate connection with it that could expand into many directions. If the series wanted to, there could be many darker avenues to explore within the game's themes. The fact that the first game is literally life or death for Olimarch could allow for such interesting discussions. From his point of view, the future could seem like such a bleak and morbid place. I mean, just imagine being in his position, on the brink of death, just wondering what else this crazy world could have in store for him, how immeasurably important his next moves are in a single month, thinking about whether this giant crazy plan of his could even work. And speaking of futures, even though the idea of Pikmin 4 seems like a distant looming thought, I can only imagine the elements the Pikmin franchise could explore if it delved into a little bit of VR technology. I mean, can you imagine it? Disappearing out of your living room and looking up to the giant world of PNF 404. There is already a mod for Pikmin 2 to play in first person, but could you imagine if it was integrated with VR controls, having to look up on the obstacles Olimarch has to overcome, realizing just how small you are in this universe as the VR kit takes you away into a distant, all-encompassing landscape. It makes you think when staring up at these horrid trials and working out the minimal odds, just how did Olimarch have the bravery to stare such nightmares in the face and carry on day to day surviving with the Pikmin, hopeful to get home, yet never truly knowing? It's the type of human bravery I expect only few of us can actually hold on to. But then, looking at his thoughts, it's not all doom and gloom. He thinks positively, admires the memories of his family, and respects the magnificence of the Pikmin species. As he looks around this distant planet, he doesn't see horror and fear, he sees beauty. He observes the natural world and the creatures within it, learning about how the ecology works. In his diary, he draws illustrations of the forms around him, and even in Pikmin 3, the player is given the option to look up from the co-pilot's point of view, yet that doesn't bring fear either, but again, beauty. The co-pad itself has camera featuristics, allowing you to capture beautiful moments like a Bulborb sleeping in the rain, Pikmin relaxing by the onion, or the sun setting over the sandy lands. Despite the dangers, the Pikmin world is a work of art. Within large creatures and a lethal ecosystem, it still is just nature doing its thing, and Olimarch is just as much a part of it as the Pikmin are. And perhaps that is what brings Olimarch back on his feet. It's that which pushes him to try his best, commandeering the Pikmin to overcome their giant world and inevitably complete his ultimate goal of resurrecting his ship, or rescuing his friend, or escaping monstrous clutches, fire up his ship and fly off into the horizon to see his family once more. And even with those difficult trials he needs to overcome, every time it's not the final stop that marks the end of his adventure, and simply reaching the end doesn't grant the best ending in the game. No, it's always the 100% route, the act of fully exploring the world and uncovering all there is to uncover. It's all the curiosity and experience built along the way that leads to the greatest outcome of all. Because it's not about the destination. In the Pikmin series, it never is. It's always been the adventure along the way that matters. Growing as a person, growing as a group, refining and expanding one's skills, and learning how to change. Together. That's how Pikmin explores its adventure format, like an open world hybrid game. It tries and achieves to do something that so many other Nintendo franchises daren't do. But here more than ever, it succeeds. And perhaps, be it 2021, 2023, or 2035, it will come to succeed once again. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not about the destination. It's about growing as a person as you go on your adventure along the way.
Yeah, that's great and all, but you're literally supposed to be following a signal right now, Dazz. All you've done so far is waffle and daydream.
Yeah, come on, Dazz, let's hurry it up already.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay. Right.
Thanks for watching. If you couldn't tell, I've been in a bit of a zen mood lately despite my video last week. And hey, it was fun to talk about Pikmin again for #Olimarch. Anyway, if you liked this and want to see more, then do consider subscribing. Or better yet, do become a patron. I've made some giant changes. There is now only one single tier and it is $1 only. For $1 you will get all sorts of bonus content, bloopers, behind the scenes, a story of how I'm doing as I'm going through the week, everything. You'll get all of it right there and then. You can also find me on Twitter where I'll be posting behind the scenes stuff as well, as it happens. Because I kind of wanted to share out my content more, so I made it more accessible. Find me as Dazz Videos on Patreon, Twitter, or Twitch. Thank you, AntDude, for making this hashtag. It's nice to see other people actually care about Pikmin 2, and hey, as I said, it was fun to make anyway. But I think I talked way too long. So for now, my name's been Dazz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit. Next Olimarch, I'll talk about Pikmin Adventure, the secret 5th Pikmin game no one ever mentions.